Hello, all. Here's another episode in the life and times of my ancestors. So, I'm going to tell you today a little bit about how my father, John Macbeth, met my mother, Grace Mauer Macbeth. If you remember where we left the story last time, my dad had taken a job at Yellowstone National Park, and he arrived in Yellowstone fresh from Salt Lake out of college and his first job, and he said it was so quiet he could hardly stand it. He said, having moved from the bustling metropolis of Salt Lake out into the wilderness of Montana and Wyoming, he said it was pretty unbearable for a while. He got there late on a Friday night and stood there waiting, not knowing where to go or what to do. The office was closed, and finally somebody walked by and said, "Oh, come with me, I can get you set up for the night." And got him arranged, and all day Saturday went by sitting in his room, and Sunday morning a fellow came by and said, "Why don't you go to church with me? You got nothing else to do?" So he did, and when he got there, being the good legal secretary that he was, or stenographer, he took with him his steno pad and pen, and when church started up, he thought, I don't have anything else to do, so I may as well keep my notebook working here. So he started taking notes of the meeting in shorthand. And he said the speaker was up there just giving them both barrels, just really going 90 miles an hour. And he quite casually was keeping up with him and just proceeding with keeping himself entertained and listening to the talk. When the meeting was over, he said this cute girl sitting across the chapel with her family that he'd noticed stood up and walked over to him and said, "Are you taking shorthand?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." "Oh," she said, "can you read all of that you wrote?" To which he replied, "You bet I can. Every word of it. Pick a spot anywhere, and I'll read it back to you." Well, she apparently took offense to that and thought he was kind of snooty and highbrow and full of himself, and so she turned around and walked off and would have nothing to do with him. Weeks went by, he said. He'd see her at the post office, and he'd walk by just so he could say hi and maybe have a fresh start with her, because she was pretty cute, and he was quite interested. But boy, she put up a cold shoulder. Come the end of summer, he'd decided, well, maybe he'd go back to church again with his friend, and he popped in on their little meeting just to discover it was her missionary farewell. She had been called to the Northwestern States Mission in Seattle and would be leaving in a week. So his friend came up and said, "Don't worry about her. I'll take care of her until she leaves, and she's in good hands. You don't have to worry." He said, "Well, we'll see about that." So he was a little late to get to do much dating with her because she was quickly set apart and started living the missionary rules, and off she went. And so he decided the next best thing would probably be to win over her parents. So he started to court them a little bit and get to be more friendly, get more acquainted. And of course, my grandma, was stricken by the fact that he was so thin. So she started inviting him over for dinner and fattening him up a little bit, as he says. So when Grace came home the following summer, which was not uncommon back then, they'd come home during the summer and work and earn enough money to support themselves on their mission in the following fall. Again, this same friend said to John, "You can just leave that girl alone. I will be taking good care of her." And he said, No, you're going to have a battle on your hands." He said, "I'm real interested in her, and I'm going to do my best to see if I can win her heart." So he took his 1934 Chevrolet that had chronic flat tires and would pick her up and haul her to work, because she lived out in Gardner, which is right outside of the park. and she needed a ride into Mammoth every day. So John would give her a ride and frequently have flat tires, and she was quite annoyed with all of that business. But about the time she left to go back on her mission, they were getting to be pretty close. She was still living the mission rules, so there really was no dating. He was giving her rides. Well, when she left to go back to Seattle in the fall, he started writing, and he said, "I didn't write the way you write to your missionary kids." He said, "I wrote a lot. And I wrote to her companions," which she thought was pretty funny. And she slowly began to give her heart to him. And when she came back the following summer, at the end of her mission, by then her parents were fully in love with him. And she fell in love with him, and they were married and began their life together. They stayed in Yellowstone for a couple more years, where my sister Linda, their first child, was born. And then Park Service moved them around. But that's the rest of the story for another day. Very, very interesting life and times living at the National Park Service. And it was good times, I understand. I've seen where it was in Yellowstone. I've been to Gardner, and they had a good life. They had a good life together.